I've read your book as this wonderfully polyphonic account of voices being woven into each other. And there is otherness in every familiar tone and familiarity in every unknown piece of the puzzle. Now, how did this choir of echoes and presences shape your own voice as a writer? How did it change you as a voice? Because you recreate all these extraordinary voices, even the absent ones, and you make them sound from a place within the character. But what happened to your own voice while writing?
Oh, how interesting. This is a great question. Nobody's asked me that, so it's always good. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that I've written lots of books. So I've written, I'm very much a character-driven novelist. So my books are always about character, and I like to get inside their lives and rummage about and discover who they are and feel myself emotionally connected to them and intellectually. I like to become them. I used to be an actor, and it's a bit like acting. You become your characters, and that's what I love doing with all my books. So this is the latest in a long sequence of books, but it's the first time that it's been primarily Black women and Black British women, which is very different. And I guess for me, it was, each book is a process of discovery in one way or another, but it was a process of discovery because I had such a breadth of characterization, 19 to 93 and all those women in between, that I needed to bring alive, but I felt confident that I could do it. And also I did play around with writing it in the first person, which I often forget the process. So I often forget to say this, but I started it in the third person, but then I wasn't sure that it was working. So I tried it in the first person, but then that made it too close to the characters. And I wanted to have more of a scope about their lives. So you needed to step outside of their lives as well as be inside of their lives. So that was a journey for me. I think perhaps, I'm not sure that it changed me as a writer, but I found it really fulfilling writing so many characters. And also the response has been incredible in terms of those characters, that people say that it's like they know these women now. And yet each woman has only about 30 pages, really. And so in terms of me and how I feel about my work, I know that this book has done a really good job in connecting people to my characters and Black British women in a way that they may not have been before. So that's something that I take from the project. But in terms of my actual writing skills, I think every project's an ambition, and it's always got challenges that I'm trying to work with. And this was, it was very challenging. It was a very challenging book to write.
I totally love the dynamic from the first person to the third and so on. I mean, it made the gaze, just encompass the entire life of the interior life and the exterior life of the characters as well. And I'm very glad you've mentioned the way in which the book shaped us as an audience, as a public, as readers, because I remember when one of my favorite authors of all time, Toni Morrison, passed away. You wrote beautifully about her work and significance, but you emphasized that, and I quote, "As I adore and want to celebrate Toni Morrison, we must always remember that the African-American experience is not the same as ours." Now, do you feel that now, with your novel as a starting point to a large extent, the experience of Black British women is finally being acknowledged also from a literary point of view?
Yes, that's so interesting, because just as you were reading that out, I was just thinking that if I could have written this book 40 years ago, because, I love her work so much, and she was such a big influence, but I needed to find my own voice and do my own thing. But 40 years ago, I couldn't write this book. It was not in my imagination. I was too young. I didn't have the experience. And yet 40 years later, I was able to write it, and for it to have a sort of cultural impact, the cultural impact that it has had, which is incredible, really. So I think that from what I hear, the book is doing the job of opening the reader up to the Black British experience in the way, and I would never compare myself to Toni Morrison, but in the way that Toni Morrison was able to do that. But, you know, the thing is, this book won the Booker Prize, and that's how it went out there into the world. You know, if it hadn't have won the Booker Prize, it would have gone underneath the radar. Yeah, no, really, like my other books. The fact that it won the Booker Prize meant that it's projected globally. But it's the same with Toni Morrison, because, you know, she went under the radar, very critically acclaimed, but she went under the radar until she won the Pulitzer. And that was because there was a campaign for her to win it, because a lot of African-American academics and writers said, look, you can't stop overlooking this woman. And then she won the Nobel. And then that suddenly gave her work a global audience in the way that she didn't have before. But then she also became the person writing about the African-American experience. And to a certain extent, that did put everybody else in the shadow. And that's not a good thing. That's not her fault. That's just how she was seen. So from my point of view, yes, this book has done a similar thing, but I'm very much an activist. So I want to draw attention to everybody else, because I know what it's like to be in the shadow of the people who are seen to be defining what your literature is about.
Now, there is race and there is color in your book, and there is the tension between. Was that particular space difficult to explore?
No, very easy. Very, very easy. I've been a politicized Black woman for 40 years. And so it's something I've been talking about a lot with my friends. It does feature in different ways in my books. Race and colorism, we call it colorism or shadeism, which is about the color that you are, not just the fact that you're identified as Black or Asian, is something that I've been talking about with people for so long. And it's not something that is really part of the conversation around race. And it needs to be, because how you present to people affects how they're going to treat you. And even within Black communities, if you're lighter skinned, you're going to be treated in a different way. You're going to get preferential treatment. So it's really, really important. And so what I was able to do with this book was to put all my knowledge and all my conversations and all my understanding and all my reading, and to sort of filter it through these characters. So the characters are the most important thing, but inevitably I was able to explore all those different areas in different ways through the characters. But the other thing is, yes, race is important in the book, but so is class. And, you know, I like to think that there are lots of things that are at play, big issues that I'm exploring, and race is definitely one of them.
Now, you recently said in an interview for the Times Literary Supplement that all of life is political, and so too is writing, intentional, conscious, or otherwise. The politics of writing emerges through the choices the writer makes, the messages that are received, and how the work might be contextualized and interpreted. What is the one thing that you hope to change through your work politically?
I love it when you quote me back to myself. I think, oh, that sounds good. Did I really say that? Oh, I sound quite intellectual.
I love quoting you. So, yeah.
What one thing? I want to deepen people's understanding of the people they perceive to be different to themselves. And because I'm particularly interested in race, from my point of view, that's the main thing. But I want people to develop more empathy towards everybody, and to get rid of the assumptions and the stereotypes and the really damaging limitations that they impose on people who they consider to be inferior. So it's really about my thing. My thing is about creating a more inclusive society, a more equal society. And if my books can help do that, in all the different ways that my books operate, then that is my contribution.
Now,
and also to become very rich.
Well, I hope you do. Now, the poetic quality of your novel is undoubtedly one of the most beautifully haunting aspects of your writing. Did you ever fear while writing that this is a peak, something very difficult to live up to later? I mean, is there pressure in praise? Oh,
good. So No, because when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking this was going to be, I wanted it to be my breakthrough book, because through the process of writing it over a number of years, I realized that it was the kind of book that was needed out there, or that people realized they needed it. Whereas when I started it, there was very little interest in literature by women of color or by Black British women. I mean, there just wasn't. There were a few people who were doing very well, but generally speaking, there was no interest. So I wasn't thinking that this was going to be the big book that everybody was going to be reading, but that's what it turned out to be. But then by then I'd already written it. Do you see what I mean? I was hoping it would be the big book, but by then I'd already written it. So then I got all the responses to it, obviously, which has been happening over the last 18 months. And, not just the Booker, but lots of other prizes. And, it's just been the book everybody's been talking about. And it's like, whoa, this is huge. This is huge. And so I have thought in my head, what do I do next? And actually, I have a new book coming out, which is nonfiction. And that's a really good move. And it's coming out in October. It's called Manifesto. It's a really good move because I'm talking about how I reached the point that I've reached as a writer today, and about my life and my history and so on. And I think it will explain to people who I am through the prism of my work. But it's not a book that you can compare to Girl, Woman, Other, because it's nonfiction. So I've kind of dodged that bullet. But I know that the next book will be very different to Girl, Woman, Other. And because I've written lots of different books, I know that I will just write it. And I will have voices in my head, but I always have those voices in my head. And they might be louder, but I will have to get rid of them in order to write the book that I really want to write. And I don't know what that is yet, but it won't be competing with Girl, Woman, Other.
I'm very much looking forward to writing it. I'll be waiting impatiently, so to say. Now, you started Girl, Woman, Other in 2013. What was the most important thing you discovered about yourself? And what was the most important thing you discovered about the world while writing it?
Ooh. You're so good. What was the most important thing I discovered about myself? Oh, yeah, maybe my compassion. Maybe I discovered that, because I think it's a very compassionate book, but it's also not a book that allows people to get away with the things people get away with. But, it's about our humanity. And that's what I think I've discovered through writing it, that it's so important to write your characters with compassion while also being a truth teller in a sense. And I think that's why the book works in the way that it does, because with each character, you may have opinions about them, and they may do things that you think are morally, moral flaws, that they may have moral flaws and behave in certain ways that are not acceptable, but you still get their humanity. You still understand who they are. So it's like, writing about a dictator. You could write about a dictator in a very cardboard cutout way, in that they're just inhuman, they're cruel, they have no humanity. Or you can write about a dictator and show that, but also have what they're like in their family relationships with us as a parent and so on. And so I discovered that I have to be compassionate towards my characters as a writer, I think. And in a sense, I have been doing that. I think I have been doing that, but I became aware of it. What did I discover about the world?
Yes.
Ooh. So, what? Trump?
Oh.
Trump. Yeah, because Trump was such an egregious presence on the international landscape, and still is, because he hasn't gone away and he will come back in some way. And the fact that he was able to assume the presidency and be as destructive and immoral and discriminatory and all the awful things that he was, and still stay in his post and still be supported by the Republican Party was a real failing of that political era in America. And it will go down in history as a real failing. So that was really deeply shocking for me in terms of world politics. And then the other thing was Brexit. Not really, I never thought it would happen. And for so many of us, don't forget, over half the people voted to leave, but it wasn't a big majority. And they had been fed lies. And those lies were exposed, but they still believed that they should leave Europe. And now they regret it. And we knew they would regret it, especially in some of the industries that are really badly affected by Brexit, like fishing. Why did they want to leave in the first place? They're crazy. That I guess it's about the presence of demagogues. Trump was a demagogue, and we have someone called Nigel Farage in England who's a demagogue, and maybe not technically, but he behaves like that, and he seduces people into behaving in ways that are actually self-sabotaging. So the fact that we then left Europe and this country is like the 11th most prosperous in the world, and we should choose to divide from one of our main community and have to start all over again because there is this misguided idea of the British greatness during empire, and the British Empire was appalling, is just terrible. So those were the things that really happened while I was writing the book. Oh, and Black Lives Matter, Me Too as well,
This is one extraordinary answer anyway.
Okay.
Now, privilege is another very important aspect of your book. And you actually have, as one of the characters, quote, Roxanne Gay's bad feminist and our need for a new discourse for discussing inequality. How did you feel when Girl, Woman, Other became Roxanne Gay's favorite book of 2019?
I loved it. I loved it. Because I'm a huge fan of Roxanne Gay. I think she talks real sense, and she's very active on social media, but social media can be a very toxic space. And so to think that she had read my book, also Obama, right?
Yes.
Even more so, it's like, when I heard that he had chosen the book as one of his top 19 books of 2019, I was just like, no. Did he really read that book? Did he read it? Or did Michelle read it and then say, Barry, you put it on the list, So Roxanne Gay reading my book and also loving the book. And she actually interviewed me last year online, it was lovely. It's wonderful because even though I know a lot of people look up to me these days, I also have people I look up to. And she is somebody who is just very outspoken. And I think she does complicate the conversations that we have, which so many people want to simplify through social media. So it was great. It was great. I loved it.
There is always lost at the core of becoming in your fiction. Absence, a page that was left blank. And you seem to be fascinated by this primordial void. Is it so?
I haven't noticed it. Tell me more. Seriously.
There is always the absent mother, the unknown story from the very beginning, the connection that we fail to acknowledge, the thing in us that is familiar and yet so unfamiliar, so another.
Wow, this is an academic essay. You do realize this? What your observation is an academic essay, which is really interesting. I would say that I hadn't noticed that, but it's interesting that you noticed that, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But I would say that going back to my childhood in the 60s and 70s, growing up in a white area, feeling like an outsider, not knowing my father very well because he didn't talk to us, but also not knowing anything about his heritage because he didn't share it with us. And we didn't know anybody else from Nigeria other than my father. That was definitely, as I grew older, I realized that was a void. As I grew older and became politicized, I realized that I had this Black identity because when I was growing up, I was mixed race and I didn't really associate with Black people, but also I wasn't really around Black people. So I go to drama school, I meet other Black women, and then I decide, I discover my Blackness, and this is where I belong. But then I go back to my childhood and I think, I don't know what that that culture was a white British culture because of what my father didn't pass on. So if you're seeing this kind of absence and void or whatever through all those characters, then that is probably something that I experience and do to a certain extent as well, because I don't know my father's deeper history. I know my white history, 250 years, but I don't know my dad's history beyond his parents, and I don't know anything about his parents.
You are the architect of this highly complex fictional construction. What fueled your focus as a writer all these years?
It's going back to that absence in my childhood. Yes. And sort of you come of age and you're 20 years old, 19, and you realize that, the society sees you in a certain way, but you have a completely white background. And then you realize that those books that aren't there, that could have helped you feel more accepted in your society, were never there. They weren't published in my childhood. And you realize the culture, you weren't in the culture in any way. And this isn't a complaint, because it is part of the history, the sort of consequence of history. So then you think, well, I'm going to put those stories out there. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So although I'm writing because I love writing, I'm also writing because I want to make that contribution to our culture. And that is a very powerful motive. And it's so interesting because I think there are lots of writers out there who wouldn't come up with this answer. They would say, well, it's just how this is my form of expression. And I'm interested in people. And I want to look at relationships or whatever. But actually, my thing is really, I've been driven to explore the African diaspora in the ways that I have, because I think it is an absolutely essential part of our culture that this happens, and that I am one of the many people doing this, and we need to do it. Otherwise, what is the point of being here when we are not represented in anything around us?
There is cooking, and there is betrayal, and traveling, and pain, and trauma, and joy in your novel. And you take the reader on this extraordinary journey and make every step of the voyage an intense experience. And the women in your fiction come in all emotional shapes. What was the most challenging part of bringing them to life?
The challenges were different with each character. Some characters were much easier to write. I think the character who's no longer alive was very difficult, Grace. And that's interesting because I have written historical characters in the past who are no longer alive, but somehow with Grace, I could not get inside her. And so I was seeing her as the victim of racism in the 19th century in the north of England, as opposed to allowing her voice to come through as a real character and, a real person. And so she was very flat on the page for a very long time. And at one point I was going to get rid of her because I just thought, you're not working. Whereas all the other characters, when I write them, their voice just comes and it's so lively and I love it, and I don't even know where they come from in a sense. But with her, that was really hard. And so it took me a long time to find Grace. And also Morgan Megan was a challenge, and that was a different challenge. That was about creating a trans character and having to do research and be careful, but also be bold with how I wanted to portray that experience. And yeah, so I think with every character, it was a different challenge.
Well, thank you so much for sharing these inside stories. They will be precious, I think, to a large portion of the public. Now, I felt while reading you that all mothers are written inside their daughters, just as daughters carry bits of their mother's souls under their skin. And there is this beautiful final quote: "This is not about feeling something or about speaking words. This is about being together. Is there loneliness in togetherness?"
Philosophical. Is there a loneliness in togetherness? Are you talking about my book? Are you talking about my thoughts generally?
No, about the book.
About the book. I think there's probably an unknowingness as opposed to a loneliness, in that perhaps you never really know people. And so if I think about Shirley and Lennox, she doesn't know her husband really. She doesn't know, and yet they're like that and have been like that for decades. And that's a big issue because he has actually betrayed their marriage. But even with Bumi and Kofi, it's Kofi, isn't it? You know, he doesn't know that she's got a secret. So I guess it's about people being together, but never being fully known, but also harboring their own secrets sometimes. I think that's how I would put it.
And now
the secrets are great for fiction.
Yes, they are. Indeed.
Yeah.
What is writing to you?
Writing is how I exist in the world. It makes sense of my life, and it gives me the greatest reward. And it is how I have, how I process everything, myself and the world around me and history, and imagine the future and make a contribution.